And no matter how I said it, things were just not getting done. So insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So at some point I was like, well, I'm insane. I'm doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So then I decided to pivot, and the realization there was, if I inspire my team, if my team feels inspired and empowered, then they'll find a way to do the job better than me.
Albina Rippy, thanks for sitting down with me. I've had the pleasure of knowing you through a couple of years now, maybe 1 or 2 years. Phenomenal public speaker, but you also have your fair share of business stories, which I would like to jump into today.
Thank you.
What I didn't get a chance to hear about in our many conversations is exactly what your upbringing was like and what led you into that transition to being the entrepreneur that you are. So I'd like to ask about, first of all, where you were born, Kazakhstan, and what that move was like to the US.
Yeah, I always say that I was born in a small village with no running water or electricity in eastern Kazakhstan. I grew up in the Soviet Union, so when the Soviet Union fell apart with the bread lines and all of that, that was my life. When I was 16, I came to America to go to college on my own. So back then there was no internet. It's not like you could call home like you can right now. There was no text messages.
Right.
So it was brave. But, here I am many years later.
Wow. So at that time, I'm sure you were the rare exception to go to college, let alone to the US. Was there anything that prompted that? Was it something you heard from somebody, something that you read?
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for that. Well, maybe in some ways I can, because I've always been a driven, kind of ambitious kid. But I'd give all of the credit to my mother. My mother, who was an orphan at age 7, so everything that she's built in life, she has accomplished on her own. And in the 90s, she recognized an opportunity to send me across the world to pursue a higher education. And she literally kicked me out of the house, so to speak, put me on the airplane and made me come to America. And I somewhat resisted, but I'm really, really grateful that she did that. And being a mother myself, only now do I recognize how brave it was for her to send me across the world into the unknown.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't know anyone, I'm assuming, when you came to the US, right?
I could barely speak English.
That's
It
right.
was like coming to another planet.
I bet. And the people you were surrounded by, this was college, right? Were you studying anything in particular at the time? Did you have any leanings as to what you kind of intuitively felt that you wanted to do? Or was it just open arms, what do you have, America?
Well, interestingly, right around that time when I was 16, I really wanted to study art. I went to 5 years of art school simultaneously with high school. But my mother said, if I'm going to send you to America, you are not going to study art. So I studied accounting and finance.
Okay.
Yeah, very, very practical stuff. And I'm so happy that I did, because it laid the foundation for later creations in my life.
Right.
Well, business ventures, yeah.
Well, that makes sense. And a lot of times, too, you can only connect the dots looking backwards. And I'm curious what that transition was like. Maybe it had something to do with seeing how businesses operated that you then started your first business.
I think, again, going back to motherhood, I have 2 children, 2 daughters, and they're very different. One of my children is very artsy. She doesn't care about money. She's really passionate about the world's big issues like, civil rights and equality and global warming, things like that. And my youngest child is very entrepreneurial. She is constantly thinking about new business ventures, how she can make money, how she can, be super rich and never work. And watching her, I recognize myself in her. Mm-hmm. And only now do I realize that I must have always been this way, very entrepreneurial. And if I were to zoom out even more, I probably inherited from my mother. My mother has been a really great role model for me. And like I said, she was an orphan at age 7. She built a huge pharmaceutical empire in Kazakhstan. She's very entrepreneurial.
Wow.
And it probably runs in our blood.
It sounds like it does. It sounds like it does. And even, in my family, there's certain characters who stand out where they either make a big move from their small town or have a big goal and set it. And to me, at least, as I start doing the things that I'm doing, I notice that if I'm in a position where things are stagnant, I get this hinting suspicion, this intuition that if I don't make the move, nobody will do it for me. You worked, I believe, as a CPA, was it, for a few years? Mm-hmm. Did you have that hinting suspicion, or what was the first transition where you started getting ideas like, I need to do something on my own?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I hate to say it out loud, but only looking back, like you said, can you recognize those kind of pivotal moments in your life? I was very content working at one of the world's most prestigious accounting firms. It was a very unlikely story that I could get a job there, and somehow I did. And I really enjoyed it because I am deep inside a total nerd. But it was my husband who said, hey, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? And I guess he saw in me what I didn't yet see, or at that point in my life, I did not see all of my potential. And in this story, I'll give all the credit to my husband, who's always pushed me to step outside of my comfort zone and try something new. So the first leap of faith was leaving public accounting and working for Continental Airlines. And I so didn't even believe in myself. I didn't even want to apply for a job because really? I said, why would they hire me? Everybody wants to work for Continental Airlines. You get to travel the world for free. Why would they want me? And it was my husband who sent my resume, not even me. This is how little I believed in myself. Wow. I got the job. We got to travel the world. Then it was again my husband who said, let's open our own business. Yoga was something that we really enjoyed. And he said, quit your job. Let's just start a yoga studio. And we did.
Wow.
Yeah, and only his, I guess, faith in me and his massive support that over the years I started believing in myself as I was making those timid steps and I was growing and expanding and becoming better and better. I was like, oh, I guess I could do all these things.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating to hear what you were like so long ago, because that seems like a completely different person right? than the speeches that I hear and knowing you. And it seems like there's been a lot of pivotal people, very important people in your life who have helped pull the best out of you. And that was one of my questions that I had, which was, if you have something like a passion for yoga, why not join a company that's already doing it and still have the lifestyle, be able to enjoy it consistently, versus starting a whole new venture, which, as you know, comes with a lot of other things besides yoga.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, nobody made yoga successful. There was not such a thing as a successful yoga studio or a successful business, yoga business. So in many ways, we were the pioneers of the industry. And for the first time that I know of, at least in Houston and Texas, we were the first massively successful yoga studio. Mm-hmm. Nobody has done it before. We made it possible for other people who were passionate about yoga join an existing company without taking all the risks. But when we started, there was no such thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What was the closest comparable thing? Were there, I guess, just to paint a picture of what the landscape was like, were there classes you could sign up for, or were they not just up to speed of what you thought they could do?
Yeah, so back, we were talking about early 2000s. So at the time, you could do yoga in a gym, which like Bally's Total Fitness or 24-hour fitness. And it was just like yoga in an air-conditioned room. And it was just let's just call it stretching. It wasn't really yoga. There was also Bikram yoga, which was very rigid. Like you couldn't leave the room, you couldn't sit down, you couldn't have a sip of water. So it wasn't something that we liked. So we saw an opportunity. We wanted something that wasn't there in the market. All the great entrepreneurs tell the same story.
Sounds familiar.
We saw a need. We wanted something that wasn't there. So we decided to create it. And we did. We opened a first yoga studio that had multiple disciplines or lineages of yoga. Later on, we recognized that it was a huge mistake to have too many offerings. But that's a part of a different story. The progression over time.
Yeah. The progression is what I'm very interested in, because a lot of people will have that moment where they say, what I wanted didn't exist, so I'll make it.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to open up one yoga studio, but to go up to 7, is a whole nother set of skills and set of personal beliefs that you had. And I just want to hear a little bit about what that transition was like.
Yeah.
Why not be content with just one, and what did you have to learn to scale up to 7?
You asked very good questions. I'll talk about yoga, but I think the same principles can be applied to any kind of business. Because once you understand the mechanics of the business, you can translate it into different areas and different industries. So for us, when we first, and us, I mean my husband and I, we opened our first yoga studio as a product of our passion. We loved yoga. We wanted something that wasn't there in the marketplace. So we opened a yoga studio, and we offered too many different styles of yoga. And at some point, it became very apparent that you cannot scale a business if you have too many things that you're offering.
Right.
And we decided to offer 2, later on 3 things, but we decided that it will be really great at those 2-3 things. And that was the initial growth from 1 to 2. And that was a giant step. And I was just talking to somebody, a yoga studio owner, just this morning, who is considering opening another location. And I said, going from 1 to 2, it's not double the work. It's not double thinning of the resources. It's an exponential leap forward that will stretch you in every kind of way. But ultimately, why did we open the second location? Because the first one was massively successful. And
it's
we
a good
decided,
reason.
well, why not? Why not scale and double everything? That was a huge learning. It did eventually double, but it was a long path to get there.
Yeah. And along that path to get there, what would you say is the biggest challenge that you had to overcome? I'm sure there are many of them.
Yeah.
But what was the one that either required the most learning, that was most foreign to you?
Yeah. I would say 2 things. One, you've heard it before probably, people is the most challenging element of any business. Finding the right people, training the people, inspiring your team, that is the most important thing. And that is kind of like the wild card, right? That element of business, in my experience, takes up most of your time as a business owner. And then the second element, which is equally as important, and probably the 2 go hand in hand together, and that is creating systems that you can scale.
Yeah.
If you have no system, no framework, blueprint, so to speak, you can't scale a business. So that path of from 1 to 2, that was a massive learning when it comes to structuring, creating a framework, a blueprint of a structure of a business that you can just replicate over and over again.
One of our initial conversations when I was asking about your biggest challenges, things like that, it was a while ago, probably a year ago. One of the things that struck me was your importance not only on people, but on balancing people's training and motivation.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying something along the lines of it's better to train inspired people than try to inspire trained people who have the skills. So did you have a blueprint or a strategy for identifying the people that could be in it for the long run, or was it mainly on intuition?
You are a great listener, Blake.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really awesome that you remember like really important things. I think it's an important thing. For us, it was kind of trial and error, to be honest. It's not like you can read a book. Maybe there is a book, but we didn't know. So for us, it was, at first we would hire really great people, like experts in their field. And what we realized is that we call them, in the world of yoga, we call them yoga divas. They were all about themselves, right? I am an exceptional teacher. I. And it's very difficult to lead a team where everybody's only about themselves. So after a while, lots of learnings, lots of drama, we started training up our team from the ground up, rather than hiring people who are already experts. So that meant that we would train every single person on our team. At some point, we had 150 yoga teachers. We trained them from like the moment they first walked in the door as yoga students, and we trained them all the way to becoming yoga teachers and eventually moving more into the leadership positions. So every single person on our team, my husband and I personally trained.
Wow. That's a lot of conversations.
It's a lot of conversations. At some point, and I think this is a conversation that you remembered, at some point, I remember we had weekly meetings and our whole leadership team would be there. And I found myself saying the same things over and over and over again. We need to get this done. And a week would go by and nothing would get done. And it was very frustrating for me, like my team wasn't doing what I was asking them to do. And no matter how I said it, things were just not getting done. So insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So at some point I was like, well, I'm insane. I'm doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So then I decided to pivot, and the realization there was, if I inspire my team, if my team feels inspired and empowered, then they'll find a way to do the job better than me. And at a certain point of our growth, my job, my husband's job, was only to inspire people. That was our only job.
Wow.
Inspire people and, create a plan forward. Create a strategy, a vision, and that's it. Have a vision, inspire. Have a vision, inspire. And then the team does everything on their own because they'll come up with a better way.
Right. Well, that's a great strategy to have, because you just keep adding enough people. If you're trying to command and conquer from high above and tell them every detail, you're going to go crazy. It's not going to work.
And you can't. I mean, you can't be great in everything. So you have to bring in people who are better at other aspects of the business than you.
So you figured that out, which is like one of the golden keys that I've been piecing together as I hear your whole story. I'm sure it wasn't all trial and error. Was there anything that you learned along the way, any books, mentors, coaches, things like that, where you got these kinds of things from?
Yes, there were a couple. The first one, and I highly recommend it, it's called Stegen Integral Leadership. Stegen Integral Leadership Program. It's out of Dallas. I'll tell you my experience with my first experience with Stegen. It was very expensive, so it was a big investment. To me at the time, it was like investing into an MBA program.
Right.
But somebody who we trusted recommended it. So because I'm more of a business savvy person than my husband, he's more of a visionary and a creative type, I signed up with Stegen. And I show up, you have to have a certain certain level of revenues to be even considered to be a part of this leadership training. So I show up, it's me and 25 men. They're super successful, super ambitious, super brilliant.
Sure.
And it was really, really intimidating to be the only woman and surrounded by 25 badass men. So that was kind of like caused me to step up on many different levels. It goes back to your inner state as a leader. So if you are in a really great space as a leader, then everything that you do is going to be easier. As opposed to, most business owners, they try to do things and they put their own inner state on the back burner. Do you understand? So Stegen taught me to turn that old paradigm that I had upside down. I have to work on my inner state first, on my vision, on my thought processes, on how I feel first, and then everything after that will follow.
That makes a lot of sense. And how do you do that? What techniques, rituals, things?
So that kind of brings me to the second most important thing that I've done as far as helping me create a business success, and which was Tony Robbins. So Tony Robbins trainings, and he teaches ultimately the same thing, which is, he says, 80% of your success or failure in anything depends on your psychology, your inner state. And only 20% is everything else. It's your resources, time, opportunities, right people, right ideas. It's only 20% of your success in anything. 80% is how you feel inside. So if you're in a really great place internally, then you can do anything. But if you're in a really lousy place internally, then nothing that you do in the external world will get you there. You're just going to get burned out. So the things that you do is what? Personal growth, it's meditation, it's finding ways to get into a peak state, whether it is running, yoga, meditation, cold plunging. It's many people talk about this flow state, and there are many, many different ways to get there.
Yeah, my personal favorites are the gym, working out, running, martial arts. After I do that, I'm so tired. The world could be ending tomorrow, and I'm at peace. I'm ready to go. I'm in my peak state. Do you have anything specific to you that you do in your routine to get in that state?
Yes, and I actually heard you in one of your speeches talk about music, how important music is. And I'll just add to that if you attempt to get into a peak state more intentionally, you will get there faster than just like trying things. And what do I mean by intentionally? I do a lot of work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he does an exceptional job explaining. He doesn't call it peak state, but ultimately it is peak state. It's a flow state. It's connecting to the divine. It's the unknown, quantum field, whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, it's coming into a state of cadence. Everything that you just mentioned helps you get into the state of cadence, harmony, rhythm, which is physical activity combined with music, combined with breath, and combined with a clear intention. What is it that you want to do, or where do you want to get? Combining all those elements together will get you there. So for example, this morning, I don't just listen to music when I run. I listen to a particular kind of music or a particular kind of meditation that has a certain rhythm. So when I run or when I walk, I breathe, and every step with every beat of the music gets me into a certain state of cadence, balance, harmony. And I'm so good at it now that I can get in it really, really fast.
Interesting. People
call it the runner's high, right?
Right.
So it's ultimately that, but if you know the ingredients, you can get there much faster. So I get into a peak state, and then 30 minutes of my running is pure download from the source, so to speak.
Sure.
What to do, how to do it, when to do it. That's it. I just write it. A lot of times I stop and write it down on my phone because I don't want to forget it, and I finish it up with a cold plunge at Barton Springs.
Excellent.
That is my morning routine.
Excellent. I've experienced a lot of the same flashes of insight, specifically after or during a long run. Yeah. What kinds of music hit that rhythm for you?
So I listen to meditations. So I omitted a big part of my morning routine, which very, very early in the morning, when your melatonin levels in your brain are very high, actually your melatonin level in your brain is at the peak. I wake up before 5 a.m. and I meditate for about an hour. And then I go running. And I also, when I go running, I also do a guided meditation with certain music. Again, Joe Dispenza has walking meditation recordings where his music is very, very mathematical. It's designed to get you into that peak state quicker because it affects your brain waves. So you slow down your brain waves. And it's guided because he teaches you. Well, I'm kind of getting off topic, and we can nerd out.
No, this is. Let's do it. Yeah.
So most people are focused on their problem. Let's just say you have a problem at hand, and all of your attention goes to that problem. How to resolve that problem? Well, was it Einstein who said that you cannot find a solution to that problem from the same level of consciousness that created the problem? So if you're focusing on the problem, it's going to be very difficult for you to come up with a solution. So you have to change the way your brain works. Most people don't know how. They're just super stressed out and they try to fix the problem from the same level of consciousness. It's never going to happen. So the way you do it, the way I do it, and this is what Joe Dispenza teaches, and his research actually proves it. It's not just some telltale story. If you train yourself to expand your attention to the space surrounding you, ultimately you go from the very narrowed focusing on the problem, to very open and expanded focused. So it can be, if I'm in a meditation, I sense the space to my sides, above me, behind me, below me. If I'm running, my eyes are open. I literally, it goes from looking down, I look up and all of a sudden I see all the trees. I see the sky. I see the grass. It's like literally my focus expands. And I can sense how my brain waves change. I can tell you the moment it changes.
Interesting.
Because I feel my whole body shifts. So from that expanded, focus, all of a sudden you're no longer focused on your problem. Right? It's ultimately what yogis taught us for millennia, be present. And Blake, I've been practicing yoga for over 25 years. For the first 20 years, I had no idea what in the world that meant. I did not know. I thought I did. I thought I knew what being present meant, but I really didn't. Being present means you're not thinking about anything. You're not thinking about the problem. You're not thinking about your to-do list. You're not thinking what is yet to come or what happened yesterday. You're truly present. Your focus is expanded, and in that moment, you get the download from the source. If you add to that every step, every breath to the rhythm, you're in a state of rhythm. Yogis call it spanda, the universal rhythm. Once you hit it, inspiration just comes to you. Wow. Am I making sense?
That's absolutely fascinating. Yes, because I've experienced similar things, but not to that level where you can, on command, create that state.
You know you can train yourself.
Of course. Yeah, well, I find it fascinating that the problem and solution all seems to, well, the problem at least exists in your head. It's this intellectual thing you have to solve, but the solution lies in being physical and being aware of your presence and expanding that.
It starts with the physical, Blake. So the training part comes from the physical, but ultimately the solution is going to come from the source. It's going to come from something bigger than you. But you use your physicality to get into a certain state, an energetic vibration, if you will. You elevate your energetic vibration from stress and worry, which is very low frequency, to feeling grateful, to feeling amazing, to feeling madly in love with life, that's an energetic, higher frequency. And in that frequency that starts with your physicality, you become a match. It's like a QR code. It's like your cell phone reading certain information that you cannot see, you cannot touch, you cannot hear, but your phone can. Or like radio waves, right? You can't hear, you can't sense them, but your radio can.
That's a good way of putting it.
Tuning into a certain frequency.
That's the best analogy I've heard for that, which is it exists all the time, all around you, but you're on the wrong station. You're in the station of either stress or being so close to the problem, but you change your physicality, you change the dial, and you access what was always there.
And to bring it back to, since we talked about the business, hard work will only get you to a certain level of success. And I found it very, very quickly, because at some point I was working public accounting hours, which is 80 hours, billable hours a week is nothing compared to owning your own business. So I found myself at a certain point in my life where I was working 24/7 all the time. And at some point, I was no longer moving the needle. Like my business grew to a certain degree, and after that, I just knew that, well, first of all, it was humanly impossible to work anymore.
Right.
So I said, well, there has to be a better way. And that is when I became really fascinated with meditation. And ultimately, what I was doing, intuitively, not even realizing it, I was elevating my energetic frequency. And that's how I always say, I sold my business in perfect timing. I make my business decisions in perfect timing, in a perfect way. You can call it through intuitive hits. I call it, I just get to a certain state physically, and then the guidance comes to me. You can call it inspired idea. You can call it divine guidance. You can call it gut feeling, whatever you want to call it. I know that it comes from something bigger than me. And it does not come from working hard.
So walk me through what it was like when you had that realization, that intuition of, now it's time to sell. I built it up to this. Here's where I am at life. What was that like for you?
Are you ready? It's a little bit of a mystical story.
Sure.
Well, first it happened like this. I told you, I was working around the clock and I was not moving the needle. And I was almost like hitting my head against the wall. I was like, well, what am I doing? What do I need to do differently? Because if you say the quality of your life depends on the quality of the questions that you ask. If you ask a lousy question like, what am I doing wrong? That's a lousy question. Your brain will give you a lousy answer. What am I doing wrong? Because you're working hard, and then you're going to work even harder. But if you ask a better question like, what do I need to do differently in order to grow my business, in order to expand, in order to experience a greater level of success, abundance, joy, happiness, love, whatever. It's a better question.
Right.
So that is when I became really fascinated with meditation. I would get up just 30 minutes before my husband and kids, and I would meditate for 10 minutes at first. But during that 10 minutes of really quiet time, I would get really great ideas. And I start writing it down, and I would implement them. I'll make it happen. And then those ideas would, deliver tremendous results. I was like, wow, let me get up a little bit early, 10 minutes earlier. Let me meditate 15 minutes. So that's kind of how my meditation practice started. And I noticed that when I get really quiet and still, I would get really great ideas. So the more it happened, the more fast I was hooked. And then every year I led Vision and Goals ski and yoga retreat in my retreat center in Taos. It was like our annual tradition. And we would ski all day, we would do yoga after skiing, and then it was always over New Year's, New Year's, Christmas. And on New Year's Eve, we would always do a vision meditation. Because we did it for many years in a row. Literally, again, I would get still and quiet. And in that moment, I would ask correct questions, because it always starts with a question, and I would literally get a business plan for a year. It's like downloading. Like, got it. We'll slow down. Let me write it down. So
ask and you shall receive.
Ask
right?
and you shall receive. Yeah. So it happened like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a row, and then 1 year, it was nothing. It was a vision meditation, the one that I always lead every year. In 1 year, there was nothing around my business. What I saw was a vision of my husband and I holding hands, walking on the beach. And I was like, yeah, that's great. But like, what do I do with my business?
Right.
So I was freaking out.
Yeah.
And then you heard this story many times. I like telling it because to me, it's the mystical. On the way back, on our drive back home, I told my husband, hey, I'm freaking out. I did not get a download. I don't know what I'm going to do this year. As far as the business goes, I'm like, don't know what to do. My business is no longer in my vision. That's what I said. What do I do? What happened? And he kind of jokingly said, we must have sold the business. And we were like, ha, ha, ha. It sounded like such an absurd thing because I didn't know anybody who owned 7 yoga studios. B, I didn't know anybody who could come in and buy 7 yoga studios.
Right, exactly.
But literally 2 days later, a student comes to my husband's class and he said, hey, YogaWorks is expanding. They just went public, they got a lot of money, and their growth strategy is to acquire really successful yoga studios across the country. My husband made one phone call, and that's all it took. In perfect timing, 2 years before the global pandemic, where 60% of yoga studios went bankrupt, we sold our studios, we traveled the world for 1.5 years, and then the world went into the shutdown.
Wow.
But I repeat that story over and over and over again in my other businesses too. Because once you get a taste of the mystical one time, you're hooked. Then you're like, what else is out there? What else can I create? What else is possible? Yeah. And then your whole life changes.
Yeah. All it takes is that one experience, that one thing to completely flip everything you know upside down.
That's right.
So since you've sold that, what have you been working on since?
So we sold the yoga studios. We traveled the world. And then, but we still had our retreat center, which was a historic hotel, boutique hotel, that we turned around and we made it into a yoga and meditation retreat center. So after our world travels, we came back, and my only intention was to make that business very profitable, because a year of travels, I was kind of not paying attention. It was barely breaking even. So we came back, and the whole world went into the pandemic, and as you probably know, the hospitality business took a really strong hit, because all of a sudden people are not traveling anymore. But I leaned into my practice once again, and that was the first most profitable year we experienced. When everybody was on the verge of bankruptcy, my business was like quadrupling.
Wow.
And it was because, again, in my meditation practice, I would get all these ideas, and all I would do is just make it happen. So then I was like, well, what else is possible?
Right.
So in record time, in the year of the pandemic, I literally, quadrupled 5-6 times my revenues in that year. And then it went up from that point on. Wow.
Yeah, it seems like you just have a tremendous amount of quiet time where you let your brain just do what it does best. I think it was Nassim Taleb who said the brain is most intelligent when you give it nothing to do, and ideas will pour in. And I think nowadays it's more difficult for most people to do that because you have more distraction and more stimulation than ever before.
Yeah.
Wow. So what else was the secret of growing those revenues? Was there anything different that you implemented? Did you borrow some of the same strategies with the yoga studios?
If I said that I only lean on the mystical, which I call my meditation practice a mystical, I would be lying. Of course I hustle. Mm-hmm. Of course I use all the years of my experience as a CPA, of growing multiple businesses. Of course I'm leaning on that. Of course I'm doing the work in real life. It's not like I'm sit all day and just,
right.
Of course. This is what most people don't understand. Mm-hmm. They go to one extreme or the other extreme. They either work around the clock and really, really hustle, and they don't really move the needle that much. Or another extreme is, new agey people, they sit there and they're like, I'm gonna squeeze on my I'm very sarcastic. But it's somewhere in between. Right. And if you study the habits of really successful business people like Steve Jobs, he's a yogi. Mm-hmm. He meditated. I mean, he spent many years just in his yoga and meditation practice. Yeah. Once you get to a level of success, in the people that maybe those are the people that I'm interested in, but they're all leaning into their meditation practice ultimately, whether it is running and getting into that runner's high state, or cold plunging, or microdosing, whatever you call it, it's ultimately getting to the same altered state in which your brain is turned off, your analytical mind is turned off. Your subconscious mind is turned on. And as you know, your subconscious mind is the king. Your subconscious mind is running everything. Your digestion, everything in your body is run by your subconscious mind. Once you turn off your analytical mind, you tap into the vast, unexplored, untapped, the DNA that is turned off right now. But in that altered state, something within your physiology, your chemical balance, something shifts and you just get the download.
That's fascinating. Have you read Stealing Fire?
No.
It's a book about that studies high performance people, whether they're business people, whether they're Navy SEALs, pro athletes, and it all talks about shutting down the analytical mind, being intuitive, literally everything you just said. You don't need to read the book because you already implemented it. But it's a famous one that's out there.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of Joe Dispenza's work.
Yeah.
Are there any other books that you found to be very valuable, or ones that you find yourself revisiting?
I'm very special when it comes to reading. I don't read a book once. I read every book between 5 and 20 times.
Wow.
I'm a nerd, what can I say?
Then you really understand it though, right?
And then I revisit it again and again and again. So Joe Dispenza's books are probably, as of late, are my most favorite books. But of course, I'm trying to think, and Tony Robbins' books are great. Miracle Morning was a good one. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, Joe Dispenza's books are my favorite books. And of course, I read a lot of esoteric, totally mystical books that most people are going to be like, that's too weird.
Sure.
But Joe Dispenza, he uses the language of the science to demystify the mystical. So those really dense, esoteric books that I read, Joe Dispenza does the best job making it understandable to an average person who's not weird like me.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah. My next question is, if you were able to talk with the 16-year-old, 22-year-old version of Albina, or maybe she's out there right now, or he's out there right now, what piece of advice would you give, given your personal trajectory? What would have been the one piece that, going back to you personally, you would like to tell your younger self?
That's a really great question. I don't want to sound like a cliche, and it sounds like so overused. But I had to believe in myself more. And probably a part of growing up and maturing and going through life experiences is you have to go through all the difficult and challenging moments to come to a place where like, oh, like you have to walk the path, right? You can't just wake, I don't know, at least it has never been my experience that I could just wake up and believe in myself. I had to go through so many challenges to get to a place where now I'm like, oh, I'll get through this. I'll be fine. It will be challenging and it's okay. As a matter of fact, my new thing that I'm kind of on a personal level working with is, well, actually it doesn't have to be challenging. It can be easy and it can be fun if I decide for it to be easy and fun. Do you hear the subtle difference here?
Absolutely. And it's an interesting question. We were talking earlier about lousy questions, lousy answers, but great questions, great answers. One that I find myself asking, especially if I'm faced with a big challenge, something that's uncomfortable, is what would it look like if it were easy?
That's right.
And what would it look like if my brain was already used to this and comfortable with it and I was proficient at it? And you step into a completely different headspace.
What did it feel like if I already embodied all the qualities? So what did it feel like the moment I have already resolved that issue that I'm struggling with right now? What did it feel like if I was rich? What would it feel like if I was totally, whatever it is that you desire? And then embody that, which is a skill that you can train yourself. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. What did it feel like if it was easy and fun?
Yeah.
And it usually, when I ask that question, it usually becomes easy and fun.
Exactly. That's well said. What's on the horizon with you then next? Or is it up for the next vision meditation to reveal that?
Oh, it's a great question. I don't know yet. I mean, I do, but I don't. And anytime you start anything new, there is at least for me, it's a place of like the unknown, the uncertainty. And no matter how much I've trained myself to become fascinated with the unknown, with the uncertainty, because that's where all the possibilities are, it's still scary. So I'm in this place where I am scared. You know, I'm like, I want it, but I'm scared. I don't know if it's gonna happen, and I'm doubting myself. But it's just moment to moment choice for me. It's a moment to moment decision to make it easy, to make it fun, to make it fascinating. I don't know yet. We'll see.
Yes. Well, Albina, this has been an excellent conversation. I couldn't ask for a better one. We covered a lot of ground. I got to hear more about you. Where can people find you and get in touch, learn more about what you have to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is albinarippy.com. My Instagram is also Albina Rippy. My YouTube, it's all my name, Albina Rippy.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And walk the path.
Thank you.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Excellent.